One of the most expensive things, if not the most expensive thing in a sales operation, is the performance delta between your top performing reps and your underperforming reps. And, companies, so many of them, they struggle with being able to duplicate their top performers, right? You've had a level of success at a certain level, and then they're just not able to scale it because they can't scale the performance. Now, I have seen over the years that there is way too much emphasis on talent acquisition and not enough on talent development. See, I don't believe that you just find top performers, you develop and create top performers. And so the responsibility comes down to sales management. It's the entire rep development motion. And so what I go over in this video is the exact principles that we use to train and ramp closers into KPI. When I say closers, account executives, again, this is for any high ticket sales business, info products, coaching, software as a service, any high ticket B2B. What we're talking about is the fastest way to ramp reps into KPI. And so right when we get started here, guys, I'm reporting to you live from the trenches, just giving you the raw, unfiltered content that shows you exactly what it looks like to build and scale 8-figure sales operations and manage high-intensity sales team. And so like I always say, this channel is dedicated to the soldiers that are actually in the trenches doing this. This isn't concept. This isn't theory. This is what's actually working right now. And so although it might sound controversial for a second here, although I do not believe that, you just find top talent, it does start with talent, right? And here's what I mean by that. It doesn't mean that you're not looking for good reps. That would be silly. You want absolutely to find the best reps, but then it's how do you mold them? How do you develop them? What's the most valuable thing? And you have to make that decision. Do you want your most valuable skill set to just be to find something that exists? Or is it much more valuable to be able to find and develop something that becomes way more valuable, right? It's that development motion that you want to own internally. And so if you don't get the right rep to begin with, you're going to have a really hard time. Now, again, they don't have to be the best performer in the world. I'm going to show you what we look for here when we're looking for top sales talent. But if you find somebody that doesn't have these abilities to begin with, then obviously that's going to be a lot harder. Now, most people, they don't know how to interview sales reps, right? In a word, if I could only use one word of what we look for when we're hiring for sales reps, it's transferability, right? And it's actually that term when I'm hiring anyone. It's transferability. See, everyone's a product of their own frame of reference, right? And we're conditioned by our past biases, our past experiences. And so what most people do by nature and by default is they copy and paste what worked in the past will work here. Well, this is what I was taught, so this is what I'm going to do. Now, there's ways to break some of those belief systems, which is also important if they have bad habits. It's also where the saying comes from that you can't teach a old dog new tricks. But we might as well leverage that psychology and that absolute truth to our favor. And so we're looking for transferability. An example of something that's not transferable, all the time when I'm coming in to consult or do sales for an organization, I hear stories about, oh, well, we hired so many reps and they didn't work or they didn't perform. And they specify, they like to make sure that I know this. They say, well, we hired really good reps. So this person, based on their resume, we saw their numbers from their past job. They did X amount of revenue. They were crushing it. And I always know what it's going to be. I say, all right, well, what did they sell? And what do you sell? And most of the time, it's something completely different. Now, maybe not as it immediately meets the eye. See, sometimes people get confused because they say, well, it's in the same industry. It was a real estate coaching product and they were a real estate agent, right? That would be a really silly example, but it happens all the time because they say, oh, it's real estate, so it's vertical adjacent. There's some subject matter expertise that's helpful, but the sale a real estate agent makes is drastically different than a high-ticket ROI-based offer. Were they selling ROI-based offers or transformation? Was it B2B or was it B2C? What was the sales cycle? What was the price point? There's all these different things. And so the point is you want transferability. The closest you can get to that position, the less risk you're going to have. And so I had a mentor a long time ago tell me that your recruiting department, I don't even remember who said this. Maybe I read it in a book. Maybe it wasn't a mentor. But it said that it was a mentor. I just remembered who it was. It said that your recruiting department is your risk mitigation department. And I fell in love with that because one of the most expensive things is to hire the wrong person, right? Again, the performance delta. If you hire a non-performing rep, not only that, but the turnover and the resources you spent in recruiting, etc. So what we're looking for in recruiting is a demonstration of value and verifiable assets that they can present to mitigate risk. And so what I mean by this is, let's say that we're hiring for a data analyst role, as we recently have, right? We're expanding our data department. Well, I want them to actually show me examples or live demonstrations that they know what they're doing so we can confirm it. Because in this day and age, I mean, it takes me back to, over a decade ago. Obviously, before I had my businesses, I was a server in college at a fine dining restaurant. And this fine dining restaurant would only hire you if you had 2 or 3 years of experience in fine dining and in a plethora of, really advanced wine knowledge, alcohol knowledge. Well, I studied for a couple weeks and lied on my resume and I got the job. Maybe I shouldn't have done that at the time, but the point is, and I worked there for years, by the way, right? The point is, especially with ChatGPT and all the information that exists today, they can just study and look up all the buzzwords to land an interview, and they know exactly what to put in their resume. They know exactly the things to speak to. But send me a project that you did in the past that you're able to share. Present some product documentation, create a draft of how you would go about this project, create a plan of how you would do this, right? So we look for a demonstration of value so we can verify the capability. So in sales, you want to have a full skills assessment to actually verify the level of skill in a real-time sales environment. Especially with sales, this is important because even a bad sales rep, even a candidate that isn't very good, if they know the basics of sales, they're going to be selling you in the interview that they are qualified for the position. And it's harder to pick up on because there's not a close. It's just more relational selling, right? So in a real-time environment, we want to confirm they have the right skill sets. And so the way that we do it in our company is they have to consume 2 hours worth of content to prepare for the skills assessment. By the way, the thing I love about this is it actually makes it, they want to work with us more because they see how seriously we take things. And in the 2 hours of content, they realize how structured and legit what we do is. A lot of people worry about drop off. I've had the exact opposite experience. I think the contingency or the condition, the prerequisite is that it's good training that you give them or instructions that you give them. And so in that training, we can not only can we see if they know what they're doing, but we can compare apples to apples. I don't want to just see if you know it by concept. I'll tell you this. A sports coach can tell you exactly what play to run to, get a touchdown. I guarantee they can't do it themselves, right? In most instances. And so it's not about knowing things by theory. It's demonstrating you could do it, right? Another funny analogy, not that we really need one, but I can tell you the steps to do a backflip, but I can't do a backflip. But I could explain it in great detail, right? And so you have to verify the skill sets, okay? This is so important as I lead into ramp up in the rep development motion. Now, here's where it really begins. Let's say you found the right talent. Onboarding and ramp up training is key. Now, I'm not going to make this a recruiting video, so I'm not going to go into some of the more in-depth stuff I talk about with ramping and onboarding and things like that. I'm just going to talk about as it relates to ramp up and the training motion. So first of all, you need to have structured and dial-in training center and schedule.
Well, Josh, that's obvious.
Well, no, it isn't. Because most of the people that come to me for help on this or need consulting on this, they don't have that and they wonder why they struggle. You have to put them through a level of training first so they're acclimated, right? They need to understand how you do things. If you don't have a structured way of doing things, that's your first problem. And the reason I want to point some of these seemingly maybe could be argued that they're obvious things, the reason I want to point some of those things out is because this is where it all begins. And I think that a lot of people don't take accountability for that. Business owners, sales management, they think, well, I hired this right person and I'm giving them feedback. Why aren't they ramping up? It starts with a really structured training center. We break it into 3 main categories. Yes, there's more, but these are the main ones. We have sales training. Our company, we have the 10 steps to wires from strangers. That's our proprietary selling framework. It's very, very structured and regimented. Then we put them through product knowledge, just the basics of what they need to be able to understand the product they're selling. My methodology on product knowledge is that there's a saying out there where it's all first principles. You could sell anything. You don't need to know product knowledge. I can agree that me knowing nothing about a product and just knowing what I know about sales will outsell this guy over here, this random person that doesn't know sales. I agree with that. But I will never outsell the version of myself that has product knowledge. So you need product knowledge to be able to sell well. And then process, right? That's important. The basics. What are you doing in your CRM? How do you dispositioning leads? What's your end of the day checkout? Just the main things. All right. You need that. Now, here is the first big nugget that I want to give, unless maybe you've already got one, which would be great. Less is more when it comes to new hire training. You have to focus on critical training assets. And this was a hard lesson for us. I'll go back all the way, years and years ago when we were hiring sales reps. Everything was manual. We didn't have the training center. And then we ran into all the issues that people run into, right? It's like, well, this rep does things entirely different. And why can't I get this rep to do that? They didn't have the baseline training. So then we started adding training. And it was like, okay, that's better, but there's still these inconsistencies. So then we added more training. Better, not great. More training, more training. We got to a place where there was like 2.5 weeks, somewhere around there, of training full time. Like you would spend your entire day on it for 2.5 weeks before you hit the phones. That's problematic just from like a speed to market thing, like to get people live on phones, the ramping period, all that stuff. It also sucks for sales reps that are making commission. That's where all their money is. And so it prolongs the amount of time to get on phones, but that's not even the biggest issue. The biggest issue is they would get to the end of that training and they wouldn't remember anything that they freaking learned in the training. It was information overload. And this was like a huge wake-up call when I started realizing you can't retain information by pure memorization in an expedited time. You need to get the core information, implement it. It's a kinetic learning motion. Do it, feel how it is, cement that in your brain, continue learning. And so what we went to that is going to be super helpful in ramping your reps, do not go into information overload or overkill. Come up with the main things that you need them to know. Your core methodology of selling, talk track, closing deck, maybe that's it. And then of course, product and process, but like don't overdo this. So here's an example, like if you have a info as a service, info coaching brand as an example, and you have your on-demand curriculum and there's 10 hours worth of content that your clients get when you sell them. Do not have your reps go through that. Like pick the main videos, maybe you have 2 or 3, watch that. Watch the main webinar so they understand the language and how to sell it and things like that. That's all they need at that stage. So people go wrong in ramping because they give way too much. And so reps are having to like relearn things as they're trying to take calls because there's too much for them to keep in mind. You need a structured talk track, right? Because if you don't have, that's our word for script, right? If you don't have a script or talk track that you train them on, how can you hold them accountable when they go off the rails? Like, again, basics, yes, but some people just need to go back to the basics. Have a structured talk track. And then lastly, you want to have a skills assessment on each of these things, sales, product, and process, to be certified before they hit the sales floor. And so our product and process training are written. The sales training is a live skills assessment again. So if you think about this, they have to pass a skills assessment to get the job, go through training, pass a skills assessment to go live, right? That's where we're at. Now they're live and we get into the stuff that you're most curious to hear. Well, how are we evaluating performance through that ramping period? Well, 65 to 70% of stabilized KPI is where we'd want to see them after that first, few weeks, 30 days, call it. Stabilized KPI means, if they're stabilized, they've been there for a couple months and they're performing, what are those KPIs? I like to take 65 to 70% of it. It's just what I've landed on over the years. It's what feels right. It's what makes sense. It's what I've seen. The logic behind it is no matter how good someone is, I've seen it over hundreds of reps, hundreds. They could be an amazing sales rep. They have to get their footing on that new brand. They start to feel out the avatar. What are the hot spots and the things to speak to that really amplify desire? They just have to get in their groove on that offer, and they need enough reps, at bat. Now, if they're tremendously under that, if they're at 30% of stabilized KPI, they're typically not going to catch up. Now, I'll show you how you can evaluate that more specifically, but that's what we're kind of targeting. Now, you have to analyze pipeline maturity based on sales cycles. So this is a really big thing. I like to give the example. You might have heard me talk about it in other videos. You could click the link to one of my other YouTube videos where I talk about scaling to $1 million a month. I think that's the best one for this. And I talk about, what you're looking at to ramp fast. Well, pipeline maturity based on sales cycle. Pipeline maturity is people coming through the pipeline and ready to close. Sales cycle is the average amount of time from first call to a closed deals. You know these things. If the average sales cycle is 3 weeks, what I've had happen so many times, usually in this space, depending on what it is, B2C it's 2 weeks, B2B is a little longer. There's other decision makers, etc. But let's say it's 2 weeks. Well, you could be 3 weeks in since we hired the rep, and the client or who I'm working with can say, hey, should we get rid of this rep? We're not seeing the results. And I think it's crazy every time because, first of all, they were training for a week. Second of all, the average sales cycle is 2 weeks. So really, statistically, we should just start to see deals coming through, right? Maybe you had one or so, because it is an average sales cycle. So you have to make these decisions around the sales cycle, right? This is how we're evaluating performance. Now, we in our CRM have forecasted reports and pacing indicators that are set up. So we have forecasted revenue reports, which are really made in the CRM. If you're curious, it's basically the deal comprised of the deal value and the deal probability combined with the expected close date. That's how you would create a basic forecasted report. So it would show you when that amount of revenue is forecasted and the amount, and we do a weighted value using the deal value and the probability. So if that number is continuing to build, what we like to do is we say, okay, 65 to 70%, they're building a pipeline, but let's imagine the forecast that does come to fruition. Where does that put them in performance? So you can get a pulse instead of just waiting there for several weeks, not knowing if things are trending the right direction. That's how you light money on fire. From there, everything else is pretty much qualitative call analysis. Everything that you want to know is going to be on the calls. And so here's the problem, to be extremely clear, with what I have seen in sales management motions, development training motions, and then I'll share with you the corrections you'll want to make. The problem I've analyzed is that, and this happened in my own business, pretty much everything I talk about are things I actually experienced. I didn't read about it or hear about it. So in our business, the reps were either good or they weren't. And it was almost like a point of no return. And I was really frustrated with this for a long time. Meaning, if a rep starts not performing or they weren't performing, it was like there was no such thing as getting them to here. So let's say a rep's going and they're performing at this level and performance drops and it goes to here. They basically just phased out because we never knew how to get it back up to here. This is as simple as what I'm about to show you is. Makes a night and day difference. And so what was weird about that is the more we try to help, the worse things got, right? We would continue to give more coaching and more training and more corrective action, and things just got worked. In fact, the performance would literally get worse. This is the development motion that's broken. This is what needs to shift. And so here's what you actually want to do. In the first couple of weeks, you're really monitoring skill versus will. I mean, you're almost always valuing skill versus will in a sales organization, but in these first couple of weeks, it's critical. You want to hope that you hired them based on a certain level of skill, so they should already have the basics. And then you have to evaluate will. Now, here's the point here. Let's say that, they're having difficulty improving something because it's hard and they're just struggling with it. We actually give them a little bit more time for that, as long as they're trying. Will, however, if they're not willing to make these adjustments, implement these changes, we have a very low tolerance for that. Because if they're not willing to take constructive criticism and improve, and they're not performing, why would they ever change? Like, they're showing you the writing on the wall. They will not improve. So we analyze skill versus will, and then we're looking at, are they following the process and are they on the talk track, right? Again, skill versus will. We're looking for technical compliance, which I say down here. Technical compliance is what we're looking for right off the bat. And I emphasize that because I'm not talking about FTC compliance in this case, although very important. I'm talking about, are they following the actual process? All right. Now, the first change that you want to make in how you're giving feedback to ramping reps is there's different phases of feedback. And so we typically have 3 phases. We have your underperforming or ramping reps. I put them in the same bucket. Your stabilized reps that are generally doing pretty good. And then your top performers, maybe 10 to 20%. That's like they're just above everybody else, right? They're going to have a special type of feedback. You're going to leave them alone for the most part, but they need some feedback. But this isn't about that. So let's only focus on the one bucket, which is ramping reps, which is the same as underperforming. So we're focusing on technical compliance. Are they following the talk track? Are they following our process? And then we focus on what we call the big 3. Those are the 3 main steps in the sales process that we want to focus on. I'll explain it in a second. And lastly, we're looking at the speed of implementation. When we're giving notes, how fast are they making that correction? That's the most important right here. So again, first couple weeks of ramping a rep, are they following the process? Do they have that level of will? Are they doing what you tell them to do? Do they have technical compliance? They're on talk track. They're following the big 3 and they're implementing fast. You tell them something today, they're implementing it tomorrow. It's all about speed, right? So the big 3 is, so we have something we call the 10 steps to wires from strangers. That's our core selling framework, our selling methodology, if you call it. Now, in those 10 steps, we have what we call the big 3, which are the 3 most important. Now, if one of them wasn't important, it'd be the 9 steps to wires from strangers. So they're all important, but we boiled it down to say these 3 of the 10 are the most important, where if you lose a deal or you lose a sale, it happens in one of these 3 areas the majority of the time. And so it's discovery, pitch personalization, and the closing sequence. And this is for all sales, right? What we're looking for, for a ramping rep, we're just boiling it down to the big 3. I'm going to tell you why here in a second. Let me explain what the big 3 is. And this will all start kind of coming together. So in the discovery, we're looking at, are they finding the pain points, the core desires? Are they expanding the gap and amplifying the desire? Pretty simple. That's all we want to see. Pain points, core desires, expand the gap, amplify desire. They have to be doing that within the discovery. Then we look at the pitch personalization. Pitch personalization is, I think it kind of basically says this. Are they delivering an irresistible pitch that anchors back directly to those pain points and core desires in the desired state that they learned about in discovery? Right? This is one of the biggest mistakes in a ramping rep. They are doing discovery really well, strong discovery, good questions, building rapport, amplifying desire. They could do that really well. Then they transition into the pitch and they left all the value in the discovery. And they just like pitched a generic pitch that had nothing to do with the things that they just learned about. You're getting the information from discovery, going back to Sales 101 for a second, to know how to pitch it in a way that fits perfectly. We call that pitch personalization. And so in the pitch, we are looking at the pitch and seeing, based on what they learned in the discovery, are they anchoring those things back to it? And the third thing is, are they conducting a clean closing sequence? Are they confidently asking for the business without fumbling through and using smooth enrollment language, right? Because what we see, they'll have, and watch the calls, you're going to notice that it's always in these 3 categories. These are the 3 biggest things. If they do a really good discovery and they do a really good pitch, a lot of the times you'll see their closing sequence, they don't know where to take it. They get awkward. They get funny around money. They're not able to confidently ask for the business, guide the sale forward, take the next steps. They end up just talking themselves out of the deal because they'll say the price and then they'll talk for 5 minutes trying to justify value. They don't know how, and we have, of course, training on all of this. They don't know how to conduct a smooth closing sequence and ask for the business. So we focus on those 3 main areas with ramping reps. Now, just for a juxtaposition for a moment of contrast, this isn't what the video is about, but for stabilized reps and advanced feedback, then we go into like objection handling. Like, let's say that they're performing, they're out of ramping, they're doing well. Objection handling, attention to detail, framing and question lead-ins around how they do the discovery. We talk about different question tactics and techniques. All the other steps, the agenda frame, information confirmation. Are they trial closing? Are they getting a good temp check before going in for the business? Buying windows, collections and a funding waterfall to maximize AOV or ASP or ACV, depending on which term you use, right? So they get into a lot more complex stuff. Again, by way of contrast here, this is where why people struggle so much ramping reps. Because as a sales manager, especially a lot of sales managers are pretty good at sales, they want to give them all this value. Some of it's ego, and some of it's just not knowing that that doesn't work. So the ego is they want to show them how much they know, and they're, oh, I would have handled it like this, and this is how you should have done it. And they go through all these technical things. And then the not knowing part is just they think that that's going to work because they try to give them as much value as they possibly can. Well, surprise, surprise, it doesn't work. So here is the feedback approach. Again, skill versus will, focus on technical compliance, on talk track, on process, and then evaluate the big three. Well, here's the actual feedback approach now. First of all, we are consistently emphasizing what they did well. You don't want to skip that part. That's really important. And the reason that's important, it's not culture is very important. I was almost going to say culture is not important. That's not what I mean to say. Culture is very important, but this isn't because of culture. I'm not telling you like give them a feedback sandwich, because that won't hurt their feelings. Now, again, relationship dynamics, play a role in this, but it's just not my point. My point is that by emphasizing the things they did well, that's important for memory retention. So if you're evaluating the big three and they did a couple things in discovery very, very well, emphasize that. Get them to acknowledge that so they remember that, so they know why that worked so well, and then give them the rest of the feedback, right? Now you want to be hyper specific in the feedback weekly and measure daily. Let me read these real quick because it's a kinetic, actually, I'll stop and pause because it's a kinetic learning motion. So again, focus on the big three, not all the advanced stuff. And then what you want to do is you want to come up with hyper specific feedback weekly, and you're measuring them on that daily. Big three, that's what you're giving the feedback on. But let's say you narrow it down, and the biggest thing is they're asking surface level questions in the discovery, right? Not a specific question. They're not going deep enough. They're not really getting to the core desires and the things that will influence a buying decision. Well, then for that week, that needs to be the focus, okay? That has to be the entire focus. And every day you're saying, hey, I'm going to evaluate this. Now, you might make other mistakes. You might not do a perfect closing sequence, or you might do X, Y, Z, but I don't want to see a single call where you're not getting the dominant buying motive, where you're not anchoring around the core desire. I want to see that you're going deeper in the questions. Imagine the level of clarity a rep has to execute on that. They know to themselves, dude, on this call, this is all I'm focused on. They could put it on their computer, put a freaking Post-it note on the wall, whatever it is, so much more clear to follow. Now, most managers make performance worse because they do all of this shit up here I was just talking about. They throw the kitchen sink at the rep. So in a call review, sales management will say, this is how I would have asked these questions differently. You should have done this different on rapport. Hey, I liked how you asked this at the end of discovery, but you didn't do this, and you didn't get enough consequence questions. And when you lead into the pitch, don't forget this. And when you did the pitch, you actually communicated this inclusion a little bit wrong. And you need more product knowledge on this area because we would never use that word. And this is what the freaking call reviews sound like. So just, by the way, I did this for so long, and my company did this back in the day as well. Here's the breakdown. Here's why it breaks. Because we, typically the people giving the feedback, get to a level of sales where this stuff is simple to us because we know it so well that we think, oh, well, it's not that hard. I gave them 13 things, but it's all basic stuff they should know, or whatever it is, right? Even if they're an advanced rep, to remember those amount of things, you're going to trip them up on phones. Now on a call, they have 15 different things to think about on every single step of the call while interacting with the dynamic call that changes directions every second. It doesn't work. So call reviews should not be showing the rep everything they're doing wrong. You're just focused on the big three, and your feedback should be really isolating that main theme that you want to see them improve on for that week. So the idea here is gradual but consistent improvements, quick interactions, and it's just consistently they're improving that. Next, we want to compound the specifics, right? So we have those specifics. Remember in this example, what did I say? They're not digging deep enough in getting the core desires. So let's say they're doing that now. Let's say that they're doing a really good job because you focused on it all week. Well, now you say, hey, you're doing a really good job there. And even the pitch sounds good. But what I'm noticing is when you make the pitch, you're not pausing to get their feedback and hear what they say. Like they might have been ready to go right there. Instead, you're taking the sale backwards. You're trying to justify the price. You're throwing up word vomit, right? So all I want to see you do this week, don't forget to continue to do what you're doing with the core desires and discovery. And the only other thing I want you to think of, because you pretty much have that down, is you want to, when you deliver the price and the offer, just stop talking and get their feedback and follow our enrollment language, right? Now you're just compounding. They're already doing the first thing well because you focused on it for a week. Now you're just focusing for the thing that is on, that is on after the close. So that week you're reminding them, hey, don't stop doing the stuff in the core desires, and then make sure this week I shouldn't see a single call where you're not, pausing after the pitch and make, whatever the feedback is. The third week, the next time, right? Or if it's simple, maybe a few days later, the next thing that you do is you pick another thing. You're compounding. And as soon as you see they start skipping one, hey, remember, you were doing so well. Now you're doing the closing sequence and this other thing. You're forgetting to go deep in the discovery. You're missing that again. So they have a very clear compounding effect. I had this dumb analogy here. I got married a few months ago, and my now wife's grandma gave us like dancing lessons. Not really, but nothing formal, but we were preparing for the wedding. And the way that she taught me, she said, all right, the first thing we do is these 3 steps, these 3 moves. We practice it a few times. Do you got it? Yeah, I got it. Okay, perfect. Now after that, you do these 3 moves. And that was how we learned the whole dance. And it's a perfect example. Because imagine if she did the full 60-second dance or however long it was and said, okay, now your turn. I wouldn't even have had the first move right. And by doing it, a few things, practice and repetition, learn a few more things, practice and repetition. Even if I messed it up, I was getting all of those things right up until the new criteria. So this is why it works. And then you want to create tons of social proof around the right behavior. We call it the 3 T's. To build trust with your reps, you tell them what's gonna happen, tell them what's happening, and then tell them what happened. And the reasons that's powerful to build trust is you can say, hey, when you do this in the discovery, you're gonna notice XYZ happens when you get to the pitch, and that's why it's so valuable. Then when you're listening to calls, you're saying, see how that's happening? Can you feel the difference? Then they close deals and you say, see, listen, it's because you did X, Y, and Z. And now you're tying the results to that specific set of actions and behavior. This is like, I hope this is making as much sense as I feel that I'm explaining it. This is everything. This is how to consistently ramp a rep. And when you're just like, do all of these things differently, it doesn't happen. Now let's continue with a few more things of value here. So now we go into development frameworks, formats. So I'll just rattle through these really quickly. When you're training, there's different styles of training, and you want to do a bunch of different things. There's a lot more as well. But you want to do a bunch of different things because people learn and retain information in different ways. So first of all, specific call reviews, just like I was talking about, with vocal examples. Okay, sometimes at scale, and when you have reps that have been there for a while, you're doing your call reviews in writing. Like if you're putting it on a call intelligence tool, a call analysis software, you just type the comment where it's at. But for ramping reps, they need to hear what it sounds like. That's so important. So you need to actually give them a verbal, like, hey, here's how you ask this question. Or here's how you pitch this. Why don't you try some language, something like this, and then you do it. They need to hear that example. The second is peer call reviews. It goes both ways. You have people on the team review their calls. Now, again, by the way, I want to caution you, that one's tricky because if they don't know how to do call analysis in the way that I just explained in this entire video, they'll confuse people and they'll give, all kinds of wild feedback. So if you do this, make sure you say, just focus on these couple things. That's all we want feedback on. You could even just give them a section of a clip. That's super helpful because they hear 5 different people or a couple different people say it in different ways, but the same concept. And then you also, when they're watching other people like top performers call reviews, you typically don't want ramping reps to watch another underperformer's call. You want them to be watching good examples. But if they're watching top performers' calls, again, they're hearing what it's supposed to sound like. Then obviously role play and repetition, just highly specific role play and repetition on whatever their theme for that week is. on-demand curriculum on the subject, and then have a training vault of tons of positive examples, right? All right. Accountability forces growth. Now we understand like how we're developing them and the actual process we're going through. Well, you need a good amount of accountability. So here's a couple things that we like to do. First of all, have the reps send you calls. So if I just got done talking to a rep about what I want them focused on, we might say something like, "Hey, today, go crush it today. Send me your 3 calls today. I want to see on any of those calls. I should not see you missing XYZ." And they know they have to send that to you at the end of the day. And so there's a subconscious accountability and pressure that we talk about in sales management, which is they improve because they know you're watching. That's important. And so this is so important. They have not just listening to calls, they have to know that you're on it like a hawk. So tell them to send you a few calls. And then this is funny. Watch the ones they didn't send you. Right? That's so important. Now, maybe you just skip to that straight. I mean, you could do this very efficiently. If you're measuring one thing on that call, it could be 5 minutes for call. It takes you 20, 30 minutes to watch all 6, whatever, right? But watch the other ones. And then you could tell them, "Hey, you sent me these 3 calls, but I listened to some other calls today and you're skipping steps." You need to get this down on all of your calls. It's one thing you're focusing on, right? So that accountability is really important because they never know which ones you're going to watch at that point, right? Create a culture of team call reviews. Anyone could be put on the spot at any time. When you're doing a team training or a sync, you want to play a call recording live where you're pausing and giving feedback of what can be done differently. That accountability is really important because nobody wants to sound like an idiot in front of their team. Now, make it a positive environment. You're not breaking them down. You're building them up, but that's a really good one. Feedback in writing. So like a performance plan or whatever it is, success implementation plan. You want to have feedback in writing so you can anchor back to that and be like, dude, look, these last couple of weeks, these were the things that we talked about doing. Remember, you committed to that. You're not doing that. So you could anchor back to that in demand follow through, right? Demand follow through. Hey, psychological pressure. Can I count on you? Can I rely on you to do this one thing, man? Because I'm spending a lot of time with you and I don't want to go through all this work if you can't commit to doing the one thing that I need you to do right now on calls. It's our only focus. And if you can't commit to doing that one thing, either you're not capable, which wouldn't work long term, or you don't care, which is even worse in my opinion, right? So you want to demand that follow through. All right, last couple things here. Now, what you're actually evaluating now, like we just talked about, skill versus will, receptiveness to feedback. Are they taking the feedback and implementing it? Are they annoyed by the feedback or they are encouraged and grateful for the time you're spending to develop them, right? Coachability. Coachability is the number one thing. I would take somebody that's coachable over someone who's good but doesn't learn any day. Because if they're coachable, you could take them as far as they'll let you. Speed of implementation and fast processor, especially in high ticket, every potential deal that could have closed that didn't close could be $10,000, $20,000 plus. So how fast are they implementing what you're teaching them? It should be almost immediately, the very next day. Do they have a hunger to succeed? Are they growth oriented? Do they enjoy all the feedback you're giving them? And lastly, guys, people show you what they care about by where they spend their time. So if they tell you how much they care, but they're not listening to the calls, they're not sending you their feedback, they're not in the training center, they're telling you they don't actually care. They're just giving you lip service, right? The last thing that I'll share is this is the entire training motion. And then people always say, well, how do you know when it's not working or when to cut bait or when you've given them enough time? Well, we have what we call conditional logic-based performance management. So it's standardized in how we make decisions about performance and remove subjectivity around how we make those decisions. So it's basically a if X then Y matrix. So if KPIs are not met, here's an example. If the KPIs are not met of where they're supposed to be, but the calls sound really good, the forecast is building, the rep is implementing, keep them ramping. The results are going to show up because they're doing everything they're supposed to. If the KPIs are not met, the rep is not implementing, they're not coachable, you want to have a one-on-one around commitment and have the conversation I was just giving an example of, and maybe even limit the calls until you see that improvement. Because you're not just going to keep spending money on, ads and burning through opportunity cost if they're not showing you they're doing that. So we have that for all different stages, but these are a couple of key ones when they're ramping, right? So you're really evaluating coachability, speed of implementation, are they learning, and you're doing it with the right cadence and motion, and then you're looking at the forecasted report, right? Coachability and speed of implementation are king. Now, last couple tips here that I'll give you when you're analyzing KPIs. Now, obviously, when they're ramping, you're looking at those first few weeks, and that's why you have to really rely on the forecast growing. You can't even really trust close rate because it's volatile week over week, and it takes time to build over consistency. So you have to trust the forecasted reports. But even when they're coming out of training or ramping, you want to analyze KPIs on like a trailing 60 or a trailing 90-day basis. Because one of the things that I see people have a really hard time managing reps on is when performance is volatile. Because maybe the rep's not doing good, and you give them a bunch of feedback, and then they start doing better. So then you keep them, and then they're not doing good again. And you're like, when do I fire this freaking person? Look at a trailing 60 or a trailing 90, not just week over week metrics. Week over week is stupid anyways if you have a couple sales week cycle. But anyways, you look at trailing 60 or trailing 90, and that is going to tell you if it's high enough, keep them. If it's low enough, or if it's too low, get rid of them. Because the downs cancel out the ups, right? And so that's why I always say you got to fire the yo-yos. If they get into KPI, you have to blow them, or if they don't perform, you blow them out, they hit KPI. If they're constant yo-yos, you have to let them know, hey, I need consistency at this point. Like that becomes the number one thing they're focused on. We need consistency. Or you have to fire the yo-yos. And I always say, like, transparently show the economics, show how much money you're losing by their deficiencies, by the opportunity cost or the performance delta that's there. Maybe you pay $300 for a call. They're only turning back $500 for a call. That doesn't work within the business. Show them that's important for them to understand. All right, guys. I hope this was super valuable. Listen, I run an outsourced sales management business. We're a RevOps intelligence firm, not only RevOps implementation, but also a sales augmentation partner. So that just means that we're bringing all the systems, all the playbooks, all the talent. It's turnkey RevOps to help people scale. Now, I put all of this content out there for people that want to do it themselves, right? For people that are learning, I don't care what you do or who you are. If you get value from this content, I'm grateful to be putting it out. But for those of you who are watching this and you say, this guy knows something that I don't, I want to scale faster and I'd rather partner with the sales partner, there should be a link somewhere here below. We work with info product coaching businesses. We call them info as a service or SaaS, software as a service. My Instagram is troy.joshua. And again, there should be a link somewhere here below. But other than that, I hope you got a ton of value to ramp your sales reps in a really short time frame.